Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Atlanta Falcon Dallas Cowboy game on Sunday. And more specifically, I want to get into the Falcons. And if you missed that game, it was pretty crazy because the Cowboys ended up winning it by a final score of 40-39. And this was just such a high scoring game. The Falcons actually had a 20-0 lead at the half. At one point, they were up 39-30 with 5 minutes left, and still somehow, some way, the Dallas Cowboys end up getting the victory. And I think if you're an Atlanta Falcon fan, this is just one of these games where you look at it and say, where do I go from here? Because at one point, when it was 3:09 left in the fourth quarter, and the Falcons were punting the ball away from the Cowboys, at one point in that game, when they were up 39-30, the Atlanta Falcons had a 99.9% chance to win. And unfortunately for them, they couldn't get the job done. So a bunch of people have been asking me, Zach, what's wrong with the Falcons? What's your take on the Falcons? What do you think of them? And I'm going to explain everything that I think about the Falcons to you guys right now. I'll start off by saying this. The Atlanta Falcons have just not been the same team since they collapsed in the Super Bowl. And maybe that just has a lot to do with Kyle Shanahan and how good and how talented of an offensive coordinator he is. But Atlanta, to me, just hasn't been the same team since they collapsed in that Super Bowl. Even though, when you look at their roster and you see Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Todd Gurley now, Calvin Ridley. They bring in Hayden Hurst. Their offensive line is, I think, improving and getting, hopefully healthier. We'll get to the injury one of their top offensive linemen suffered in a little bit. But this offense, on paper, should be very talented. And the first year after they lost in the Super Bowl, they had a successful year. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. Unfortunately, they couldn't get the job done in crunch time in Philadelphia when Matt Ryan's looked for Julio Jones in the end zone. We all know what happened there. But then, ever since that game, the last two and change football seasons for this Atlanta Falcon football team, I'll admit, they've been one of the more disappointing teams in the NFL. And to be honest, I probably would have fired Dan Quinn last year after this team got off to a 1-7 start. And then when you look at 2018 and how this Falcon team did then, they started that season with a record of 1-4. And if I'm a Falcon fan, once again, that is a huge, huge problem. So this is now the third year in a row that the Atlanta Falcons have started with just a poor record, 1-4, 1-7, and now 0-2. And I think when you look at it, right, last year when we evaluated this Atlanta Falcon team and this Atlanta Falcon season, we kind of saw two halves. Did they start the season off 1-7? Yes. And that was incredibly, incredibly embarrassing. And I said that after that start, I definitely would have fired Dan Quinn. But at the same time, the Atlanta Falcons did at least try to step up for their coach. They finished the season 6-2 with wins over San Francisco, who ended up making the Super Bowl, with a road win over the New Orleans Saints, who ended up being one of the best teams in the National Football League last year. So this Atlanta Falcon team last year, at least, they showed flashes. But I think if you're a Falcon fan, ultimately, that is your main number one problem here, is that flashes are just not good enough. It's gotten to a point now with Dan Quinn and the rest of this team where you can't be satisfied with anything besides W's. And to be honest, the Atlanta Falcons so far this season just haven't been able to do that. And I think there were a bunch of Falcon fans who, like me, wanted Dan Quinn fired last season after they started 1-7. But, Arthur Blank, I think, generally likes Dan Quinn. He wants Dan Quinn to succeed. He knows that Dan Quinn got them very close to the franchise's first Super Bowl championship. But at the same time, with all of that controversy and with all of those fans that really probably didn't want Dan Quinn back, you cannot start off this season 0-2, especially the way you have so far. That Dallas Cowboy game was an absolute disgrace. And when you look at this Falcon regime, not only talking about Dan Quinn, but Thomas Dimitroff, I think this is a guy who his job could be at stake here too if this season doesn't go well. And if you ask why, it's this. they haven't been able to draft impact guys on the defense at all. And I think that is one of the main problems with this Atlanta Falcon team. Over the last couple of years, they've added, or at least have tried to add to this defense with guys like Tack McKinley and Isaiah Oliver and the kid A.J. Terrell they just drafted from Clemson, Deion Jones, Grady Jarrett. There are plenty of names, Dante Fowler bringing him in free agency. There are plenty of names on this defense that would make you think, okay, maybe this Falcon defense could finally get it together, and maybe this could finally be the year that this Falcon team goes on a run and challenges some of the other top contenders in the NFC South. And the unfortunate thing also here for me is that I obviously wasn't high on the New Orleans Saints in the preseason, and how they looked in that Week 2 game against the Las Vegas Raiders was basically everything I expected them to look like. And Tampa Bay, even though I picked them to win the division in the preseason, they really haven't looked that good to me at all. And I'm not really ready to trust them 1,000% as the team to win the NFC South. So I actually think Atlanta, the division is very open for them to take it. The problem is they just can't get the job done. And the GM can't draft any impact defensive players. And when you look at Dan Quinn, I don't understand how this guy, the main reason why he got this job as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons was because Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator in Seattle on that team that won that Super Bowl champion, got to another one with Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas. And then you expected Dan Quinn to come to Atlanta with, and this is a team that already had Matt Ryan as its quarterback and Julio Jones as one of its top receivers, so you automatically expect them to be able to put up points. And I think so far, since Dan Quinn has been here, the offense has not been the problem at all. That's the defense. And that is a huge, huge problem if you're a fan of the Atlanta Falcons, because this guy, Dan Quinn, was brought in to fix the defense. Thomas Dimitroff has been drafting guys in the first round over the last couple of years to fix the defense. And still, with that being said, this Falcon defense really just hasn't been able to step up at all. And last year, in the back end of the season, Dan Quinn said, you know what, guys, I think we would be better off with the team kind of taking, less of my word, and he moved Raheem Morris to the defensive coordinator position, and the Falcons defense actually responded, and they were better under Raheem Morris's watch than Dan Quinn's watch. The problem for me with that is, if I'm an Atlanta Falcon fan and I see that my coach thinks the team has a better chance to succeed with less of his direction, that is a huge, huge problem. And for me, that was one of the main reasons why, kind of right before the season started, I said to myself, who are we kidding here? These are the Atlanta Falcons. Even though they have all the talent in the world, as long as Dan Quinn is their head coach, I still will never trust them to get the job done, especially in a big spot. And that's the main problem for Dan Quinn here. Your job when you were brought in here was to fix the defense. You were a guy that was known for his defenses during your time in Seattle. And still, this Falcon defense hasn't been able to improve at all throughout the season. So people have asked me, where do the Falcons go from here? Would you fire Dan Quinn today if you were Arthur Blank, their owner? And even though I do not think Dan Quinn is the right guy for the job, I don't necessarily know what firing him right now does. But one thing I can definitely tell you that it does is this, is that since Dan Quinn has been the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, the franchise has suffered their two worst losses, and it really hasn't even been close during that time. I think Dan Quinn and that Super Bowl collapse to the New England Patriots, I told you, the Falcons haven't been the same team since then. So that was obviously the franchise's worst loss, the biggest collapse in the history of the Super Bowl. And then you look at this game against the Dallas Cowboys, the fact that they had a 99.9% chance to win the game with about 5 minutes left and still weren't able to get the job done. I couldn't blame any Falcon fan that just straight up says, I want to move on from Dan Quinn. And if I was Arthur Blank, would I possibly think about moving on from Dan Quinn right now? Absolutely. Maybe the team will get a little bit of a wake-up call from that. But still, at the same time, it's just a super unfortunate effort from the Atlanta Falcons. And a couple things to go deeper into the game specifically. Everyone is talking about the onside kick, and that's my first criticism here. That falls on the coach. Since when have you played football? Ask anyone. And when you're receiving an onside kick, the number one goal, the number one priority always is to just do whatever you can to jump on the ball. And somehow, some way, the Atlanta Falcons hands team just let the ball bounce and bounce and bounce until it went 10 yards. And we all know what happened after that. The Dallas Cowboys end up picking it up. They end up scoring a touchdown. Before that, they kicked the game-winning field goal. And we know what happened after that. The Cowboys ended up getting the victory. And that falls on the coach for me. You have to tell your guys on the hands team, do whatever you can to pick up the ball. And it's about accountability. I don't think that, that's the coach's responsibility. Dan Quinn has to know that. And the fact that those guys were out there in that situation in such a big game, in such a big spot, and they were not aware of what exactly to do in the situation, that is a huge, huge problem if you are the Atlanta Falcons. Also, I love Julio Jones. I know he is probably one of the 2 or 3 most talented wide receivers in the National Football League, but we are not having any of these conversations about the Atlanta Falcons if Julio Jones could have just caught that pass for the first down and the Falcons would have ended up winning the game. The fact that he dropped that pass there is absolutely ridiculous, and I'm not going to blame it on Dan Quinn, but if Julio makes that play, the Falcons are probably the winners of this game, and we may be looking at Dan Quinn right now and talking about him in a totally different perspective. But the thing about the Falcons is this. They are 0-2 right now, and I think in total by season's end, the Falcons will be like a 6-10, 7-9 football team. But the Falcons have to beat the Chicago Bears on Sunday at home, because if they don't, their next game is at Green Bay, and that could be very challenging. And with a loss there, the Atlanta Falcons could be looking at an 0-4 start. And then, if they do start off 0-4, I could see Arthur Blank just being totally reasonable and saying, you know what, I think it's time for a change and letting Dan Quinn go. But the Falcons have a chance to at least try to save their season on Sunday. I think even though the Chicago Bears are 2-0, the Falcons' offense is significantly better than them. And then even though I just spent a bunch of time ripping the Falcons' defense, if there was ever a team that they could get things fixed against, it would be the Chicago Bears. They barely were able to put up any points in the second half against the New York Giants when they didn't even have Saquon Barkley. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Falcons. If I was an Atlanta fan, I would be very, very concerned, very frustrated with the way this season has started up. And it will be interesting to see how it goes. Must-win game for the Falcons on Sunday against the Bears.